Welcome back to another episode of Innovation Minutes Live. This week we are talking about email and email security, and as a broader topic, communication security. And this really comes from not just what happened in the US presidential election, but also what happened more recently with France's presidential election. And, as we know, the US is kind of going through a bunch of turmoil right now, looking into what exactly happened with the DNC's email hack. But more recently in France, with their latest election, there was reportedly some hacking activity where a lot of emails were stolen. And I think they learned from our mistakes and handled that a lot better through a whole bunch of different methods. But more importantly, it just kind of raises the question of how is it possible that these essentially parties, political parties are branches of government in and of themselves. How are they operating in such a manner that they leave all of this critical information so vulnerable to external groups to publicize and use for their own political gains? And why is this still commonplace?
Yeah, it's so irresponsible, I think. And it's almost like they're operating in denial that these things happen and continue to happen. And the thing I also keep thinking about is that everyone hates email. No one loves that form of communication.
No, it's such an inefficient way to communicate about anything, really.
Totally. And there are certain instances in which I get it and it makes sense. But as an everyday form of communication for a team, it doesn't make sense. When you're emailing an outside entity or, soliciting something or, those things make sense. But for an internal team to be using that as their primary mode of communication feels incredibly antiquated.
Yeah, and I think we can all relate to it in some way. We've all had jobs at larger companies where, email maybe is the most efficient way, unfortunately, to communicate. And a lot of times people in the corporate world kind of get in that pattern of just relying on email as a crutch, right? So I don't want to give them the server location. I'll just drop this PowerPoint into an email and fire it off, right? So I feel like that's kind of the prevailing mentality that contributed to, probably the French situation, but definitely the American situation, where a lot of people in our political parties kind of come from the corporate world.
Yeah.
This activity is just commonplace. It's just the way things are done.
Yeah, and so I think there's two things. There's the safety perspective, which, as I was mentioning, is really in this instance, it's a matter of national security. It's not just about, not sharing your own personal gossip. And we saw this also with the Sony hacks, I mean, look at how access to this information, and some would argue that those moved the needle in a positive direction, and that it really was a catalyst for outing the disparity between what many men and women are being paid in Hollywood. And so that's not me advocating for hacking, but I'm just saying, when this information is released, it does absolutely change the way people operate. So
and obviously a different conversation of the ethics and the importance and influence. But I thought it was interesting because as I think we were talking about a couple days ago, the Senate and the House actually approved the use of the Signal encrypted messaging app for use in with the Senate staff and things like that. So kind of begs the question, why didn't they do this sooner? But it also, I think it's going to be interesting to see how this kind of trickles down or trickles back up into, how the corporate world uses email and how they communicate. Because, as smaller, nimbler companies use different tools like Slack and things like Signal to, communicate more directly within their internal teams. I know people have been forecasting that the death of email forever. Since email was invented, it's been said its days are numbered. But I think this could really be the beginning of the end for email.
And I think there's a comfort level with it. There's this sense of both dread in seeing that you have X number of messages and feeling the weight. We've all felt the weight of our own inbox.
Oh, yes.
But then there's also the thrill of getting to inbox zero. And feeling this level of accomplishment, even if all you've done is opened emails.
Yeah.
And so I think from a psychological perspective, we have to move away from that. Let release ourselves from.
Pattern of reinforcement and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a drug reaction that we have when we're pinged, when we get something new. Even if it's not something that we want, it sends a signal to our brain of being wanted and popular, and the possibility of something new and exciting in there, even if it's a business email. And so I think shifting that into, we can rechannel that into other more encrypted, safer platforms.
Right, and still maintain that what we need from it.
Yeah, being fed by it. Yeah, I think it has to be only a matter of time. I mean, just think about the evolution the last couple of years with Slack and how much that has changed team communication. And there had been so many different tools that were on the market trying to play in that space and just falling short in very subtle ways. It wasn't that revolutionary what they were doing, but they changed a few things to make it more intuitive and more seamless, and that really changed the team communication game. And then you add this layer of the encryption imperative and security imperative, and it really changes the game of how you communicate.
Yep. So we want to know what you guys think. Feel free to find us in the comments and let us know about your personal experience with email. Maybe your company does use a more evolved product or platform to communicate. And we'll see you next week.